evening and a very warm welcome to The Point. I'm Birgit and it is such a blessing to be with you for the program this evening. The topic on the program tonight is all about event horizons in the Bible. That is, events in Scripture where time started, stopped and went backwards. And some of the examples from the New Testament and the Old that we'll be reflecting on are Jesus on Mount Precipice, the transfiguration of Jesus, and Joshua's long day. And joining me to discuss all of this is our friend and my co-host, Dr. Richard Kent. Richard, welcome to The Point.
Lovely to be here again with you. Lovely.
Oh, that's wonderful, Richard. Well, I know that this is a specialist topic for you, an area of interest and research for you. I wonder if we could start off with you offering a bit more of a helpful definition, because there may be some viewers who are unfamiliar with this whole concept of an event horizon.
Well, I would think most viewers, including, I've only become aware of event horizons myself recently. An event horizon is basically a theoretical concept in physics, but an event horizon, a broad concept, is basically when the natural laws of physics stop. It can, and it very often applies to time. In this occasion, we're talking about, for example, Joshua's long day. Basically, God stopped time completely for a nearly 24-hour period. I'll explain why it had to be that way. There isn't any other explanation for it. The same applied when Jesus was about to be thrown off Mount Precipice near Nazareth. There is no other explanation for it. And something really remarkable happened at the Transfiguration when Jesus actually appeared in eternity. Again, that's an event horizon. We'll explain that when we get there.
Thank you so much for setting the scene for us with that definition, Richard. You mentioned there the account of Jesus in the synagogue and on Mount Precipice, so I wonder if that would be a good place for us to start. We find this narrative in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4. So I'll read the whole passage. It begins at verse 16. So the Bible reads, "And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. And the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, and he opened the book and found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favourable year of the Lord.' And he closed the book, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, 'Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.' And all were speaking well of him and wondering at the gracious words which were falling from his lips. And they were saying, 'Is this not Joseph's son?' And he said to them, 'No doubt you will quote the proverb to me, "Physician, heal yourself." Whatever we heard was done at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well.' And he said, 'Truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. But I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine came over all the land. And yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them were cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things, and they got up and drove him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city had been built, in order to throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went his way." So Richard, this is the account from Luke chapter 4, and we see at the end of that passage what you understand to be an event horizon. I wonder if you could share more about that.
Well, I have to say this is only a theory, but I will say that Tim Vince, who actually took me to Mount Precipice, says that this is the only reasonable explanation for such an extraordinary event. Let's just go back to the beginning. First of all, Jesus basically quoted from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," and then said, "This has been fulfilled in your presence now." In other words, saying, "I am God." as far as the Jews there were concerned, he was the son of Mary and Joseph, and he was guilty of absolute blasphemy and should be killed instantly. That's the penalty for blasphemy. So they didn't have a trial. They simply wanted to kill him instantly. So they were really, really cross. So they took him. Fortunately, I've been there. I'm going to show you first a picture of the synagogue, where actually Jesus, this is open to the general public in Nazareth. I've been taken there, actually on several occasions. Also recently taken there on a Revelation TV tour, which I highly recommend. But anyway, Tim Vince then actually early one morning took us to Mount Precipice, and here's a picture of it. It's very near Nazareth, the next picture. There's Mount Precipice. It actually doesn't do it justice. That's a sheer drop. It's not very far from Nazareth, actually. Nazareth actually is quite a big town now, but at the time of Jesus, I don't suppose it was that big. But anyway, it's a sheer drop from the top of Mount Precipice below, and anybody who's thrown off there is guaranteed an instant death after falling perhaps 120 feet. Now, here's just an artist's impression of what was actually happening. This is the next picture is an art impression of, now we don't know how many men there were in that picture, there may be 20, I can't actually count them, but they're trying to throw Jesus off this cliff. Now, can you imagine the situation where 20, 30, 40, 50 really, really cross Jews are trying to throw Jesus off a cliff for blaspheming and saying that he's God? And we're told in the scripture, Birgit's just read it, that Jesus walked through them. Now, how can this be? How do you walk through a mob, a baying mob, trying to kill you? Well, this is what I think happened. This actually happened on many, many occasions in the New Testament and the Old Testament. I think God actually did a miracle. On this occasion, I think it was an event horizon. He basically stopped time instantly. So basically, the crowd of men were frozen in time, and Jesus simply walked through them. I'll say that again. They were almost like statues frozen in time, and Jesus simply walked through them. I can't honestly think of any other explanation. It actually happened another occasion when Jesus was about to be killed in the temple, when they picked up stones to kill him. Suddenly he wasn't there. I think the same happened, because when people are really cross and want to kill the Messiah, it's not that easy for the Messiah to escape. But I believe that is what happened on that occasion. What do you think, Birgit?
Yes, no, I definitely agree with that, Richard. I mean, the clear implication from the scripture is that when Jesus just passed through their midst, that this was a miraculous escape.
Yes.
It's actually evidently, as you say, the first of several incidents in the Gospels where Jesus escaped premature death at the hands of a mob, and you talked about the account of the stones in the temple, and that's another example. So certainly the implication, the inference is clear that this was a miracle at the hands of God, and so your interpretation is a very helpful explanation of that, because otherwise I wouldn't have really understood how that could be. You can imagine the frenzy and the sort of escalation in that situation with a mob of furious people. How could one man just quietly make his way through the crowds and disappear? So it is really helpful to hear your explanation.
It doesn't, I have to say, it doesn't say this in Scripture, but Tim Vince and I talked about it, and Tim and I agree. Whether you agree or not, it's entirely up to you, but neither of us can think of any other, and nor can Birgit think of any other reasonable explanation.
And I know that you wanted to comment, Richard, at this point on God being completely in control of time and energy, matter and space. I wonder if you could share about that.
Well, we're told in Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light, and then there was light. Well, going right from the beginning, God is spirit, and first of all he created matter, the heavens and the earth. And then he said, let there be light, and that's when time started. And we know from Einstein's theory of relativity that E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light. So God created first the matter, then when he said, let there be light, then he created energy, time, speed, He created all the, he created all the dimensions. And he's in control of all the dimensions because God is outside time. So because God created time, he's capable of starting time, stopping time, and we'll be talking more of that later in the programme.
That's wonderful, Richard. And on that note, it would be great to go to our second example. So we've got Jesus on Mount Precipice. The transfiguration of Jesus is another example which you understand to be an event horizon. So why don't we look at the narrative in the Gospel of Matthew. This is found in chapter 17, beginning at the first verse. So just to read that, Richard, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground and were terrified. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, "Get up and do not be afraid." And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, "Tell a vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." So, Richard, I wonder if you'd be able to share your thoughts. We've seen some incredibly inspiring graphics come up during that account. So I wonder if you could share your thoughts about the Transfiguration.
Well, it's the most extraordinary, fantastic account. Basically, we're told that Jesus went up to a high mountain with his 3 closest disciples, Peter, James and John, and it says that he was transfigured. And his face and his body shone brighter than the noonday sun. So let's first of all talk about the sun. What happens in the sun is nuclear fusion. It's something we can't do on planet Earth. Nuclear fusion is a nuclear reaction. And light and heat is given off from the sun, but in the case of Jesus, more light was given off than is even given off by the sun. Now, in theoretical physics, if we were able, we're not, but if we were able to move at the speed of light, we would be in eternity. However, we know, because Moses and Elijah were there, that Jesus was in eternity, because Moses and Elijah appeared. Moses is alive. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and also Moses and Elijah too. And they appeared with Jesus. So Jesus actually was in eternity. And Moses and Elijah appeared with him. Now, according to theoretical physics, the molecules of Jesus' body were now moving at the speed of light because Jesus was in eternity. Effectively, there was a nuclear radiation going on, and that is why the light shone through Jesus' clothes. We're told that the light came through Jesus' clothes. In fact, there was more nuclear radiation going on in Jesus' in Jesus' transfigured body than actually goes on in the sun. Amazing. So I believe this is another example of an event horizon where it's not that time stopped as far as the 3 disciples, Peter, James and John, were concerned, but Jesus had moved outside time into eternity, and the molecules of his body were moving at the speed of light, and he was giving off more light than the sun, which itself is a nuclear reactor. Birgit, what do you think about all that?
I think it's fascinating, Richard, and I just find it so helpful to hear your interpretation of this and just offering a perspective of physics actually on this regarding this account, because I'm really learning from you. I wouldn't have considered that myself, so it's very interesting to consider that Jesus was outside of time in that context. And I really loved what you shared too about Elijah and Moses existing outside and appearing with him in that. And as you share about these things, I consider it from a devotional theological point of view, and actually what that represents, the greatest of the Old Testament figures, Elijah representing the prophets, Moses the law, so the law and the prophets pointing to the fulfillment of the Messiah in Jesus Christ. I find it so inspiring. So no, it's very helpful to hear your analysis, your interpretation from a physics point of view about what was taking place in that account. So
I think you had something to share about the Transfiguration.
Well, as I say, I mean, I love considering these passages from a devotional point of view. So I did a little bit of study around this when I knew that you were going to be highlighting this example, and I just love considering it. Basically, that here we have the three going up what's understood to be Mount Horeb, and as you say, that Jesus took with him the inner circle, Peter, James, and John, the three that had this defining experience, and it's understood they had this special experience because of the leadership roles that they would have in the early church. So they had this very unique, extraordinary experience. It actually happened on the seventh day after Peter's confession of Jesus being the Messiah.
Really?
And Jesus making his first prediction about his suffering and death. Yes, so it's it comes off the back of that, after the back of that defining of Jesus' identity. So here we have Jesus transfigured in the awesome way that you have described, and I have these notes here, which it's really an unmistakable revelation of Jesus' identity, an unmistakable revelation of Jesus as the Son of God and the Messiah. And there's one theologian called Dale Bruner who remarks, what Jesus was within was once made visible without. And I love that. What Jesus was within was once made visible without. And it really is a demonstration of hypostasis. That is the hypostatic union, the divine and the human that is in Christ, that makes up Christ, the two natures, a reflection of that in that moment. It demonstrates, it illustrates that hypostasis, that God as being fully divine and fully man in that moment.
Wonderful.
It is amazing. And the verb, because I really enjoy looking at the original languages as well, the Greek verb that is used is metamorpho. It's a passive verb, which basically points to the transfiguration as being created by God himself, God being behind this transformation. And the Apostle Paul actually uses the same verb to describe the spiritual transformation that we as believers experience as a result of regeneration. It's the same verb that's used in Romans 12:2 and 2 Corinthians 3:18, which is an incredible thought, actually, the transformation of us on the inside as we are regenerated as well.
Oh, exciting.
So just a few devotional thoughts to add to what you've described.
Isn't it so wonderful to have a theologian on board? It really, really makes such a difference. Thank you so much, Birgit. I learned so much from you.
Oh, it's really wonderful. I really enjoy talking about these topics. So at this point, Richard, we've talked about Jesus on Mount Precipice, the transfiguration of Jesus as illustrations of event horizons. So why don't we go to the Old Testament now and talk about Joshua's long day? This is incredible in itself, actually. I wonder if you would describe what happened.
Right. Well, can you just remind me exactly? We haven't got time, I don't think, to read the whole scripture, but you just remind me roughly where it...
So Joshua's long day is found in Joshua 10, verses 12 and 14.
Well, basically, there's a battle going on, and it says that Joshua actually spoke and told the sun to be still and the moon to be still, and the sun and the moon were still for nearly 24 hours. And the battle carried on, and we can see a next picture of a battle carrying on. And this happened, the next picture, the battle carrying, and this happened presumably at night time when the sun and the moon stood still. Now, if you if you Google this, you'll find there are all sorts of explanations about, eclipses and all sorts of things. I'll tell you what, they're all absolute rubbish. Do you think I should explain why they're all rubbish, or did you want to read some scripture?
Well, I could read the verses if
Yes,
it would
please.
help.
If we've got time. If we've got time.
Yes, I think so. So Joshua 10 verses 12 to 14.
Okay.
Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the days when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jasher? And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day.
There we go.
So those are the verses.
There we go. In the remaining few minutes, perhaps we can just talk about what the only possible way this could have happened. Let's consider the Earth. The Earth at the equator is moving at 1,068 miles per hour. We're not aware of that if you happen to be at the equator, but actually you're spinning round at 1,068 miles an hour. Now, the Earth itself is travelling through space at 68,000 miles an hour. So let's just leave that aside for one moment. There is a picture of the Earth going around the sun. But if you just come back to me just for a second while I explain. Now, supposing Birgit and I and you at home were all travelling in an open car at 1,000 miles an hour. I know it's not possible. And the car suddenly stopped. What would happen to you, me and Birgit? Answer, we'd carry on at 1,000 miles an hour. Now, the speed of sound is 680 miles an hour. You'd be going at 1.5 times the speed of sound. Okay? Now, what else would be happening? Well, I'll tell you what, you'd find yourself in a hurricane. You'd be travelling in a wind so fast, you'd be blown to bits. All right? What about the sea? The sea would come straight out of the ocean beds, and there'd be tsunamis everywhere. Now, what about something else? The centre of the Earth has got magma in it. I think we've got a picture possibly of the magma in the Earth. The centre of the core of the Earth is molten, and the magma of the Earth would be spinning round at 1,000 miles an hour, come to a screeching halt, and cause earthquakes and volcanoes. So, if the Earth suddenly stops in the normal way, if the Earth suddenly screeched to a halt, forget about the fact we're travelling through space at 68,000 miles an hour. We're all travelling through the air 1,000 miles an hour. We're in we're in a hurricane, basically. We've got magma flying all over the place. We've got the tsunamis all over the place. Forget about fighting the Philistines, can't we? This is the only reasonable explanation, is God simply stopped time completely. He just stopped time. In fact, we haven't got time to go there, but when Isaiah was speaking to Hezekiah, he actually made time go backwards by 40 minutes.
Actually, I was going to pick you up on that,
Yes.
Richard, because we do have about 3 minutes. So could you share on that Hezekiah's sundial and the relationship between these two accounts?
Well, that is another event horizon. Hezekiah was dying, and Isaiah said he would make him well, but Hezekiah wanted to sign. And I can't think why, but Hezekiah thought it would be quite easy for God to make the sundial go forward by 10 degrees, which is 40 minutes, by the way. Said, no, make it go backwards. So God actually moved time backwards. It's not possible to physically move the whole Earth backwards. You can't come. The Earth's moving at 68,000 miles an hour through space. You can't just sort of reverse and screech backwards. Otherwise, you've got the same scenario, but much worse. You've got much worse magma, much worse tornadoes, much worse tsunamis. No, what God actually did was actually reverse time. He put time 40 minutes backwards. Does that make any sense, Birgit?
It does make sense, and I'm learning a lot from you, Richard. Do you think it's possible for God to do the same thing in a contemporary context? We're reading these accounts from Scripture. How would you answer that about God doing it?
I think it's going to very likely to happen to all of us in the rapture. Mm-hmm. Now, the rapture, I know this isn't the time. How much time have we got left?
About 2 minutes, 1 minute.
Right, well, Jesus said, Paul said, I'll show you a mystery, you shall not die, but all be changed in a moment, twinkling of an eye. Well, basically, I believe at the rapture, we're put into a time continuum where our bodies are simply removed Our clothes are left behind at the rapture, and our bodies simply disappear because we're in eternity. We're not here anymore. That's an event horizon.
Wow, Richard, now that might be a topic that we can pick up on a future To The Point. That's really interesting. And I know that we have less than a minute left now, so I wonder if you have a concluding thought that you'd like to leave with us all about event horizons in Scripture.
Well, it's just to expand our understanding of God. He is totally awesome. He created the universe, but he's in charge of absolutely everything, including time. He's outside time. He sees us before, he chose us before the foundation of the earth. He sees us in heaven because he's outside time completely.
Richard, absolutely fascinating. So inspiring to hear all about these event horizons. Thank you so much for all of your input. And we hope that the program, the discussion has been of interest to you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to joining you again next week. And in the meantime, may God bless you. Goodbye.